The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Crimson Ridge, Wyoming Territory, 1875, as Lillian Grant stared down the barrel of her father's Winchester. Her hands trembled, but her gaze remained steady, locked on the silhouette of the stranger who had dared trespass on what little remained of their struggling ranch. "One more step, and I'll put a hole through you big enough for the prairie wind to whistle through," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. The stranger halted, moonlight revealing the weathered face of a man no older than 30. His clothes were dust-covered, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his Stetson. "Miss, I mean no harm," he said, slowly raising his hands. "Name's Frank Hawkins. My horse threw a shoe about 3 miles back, just looking for some water and maybe a place to rest till morning." Lillian didn't lower the rifle. At 22, she'd learned that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not since her father had passed 6 months ago, leaving her alone to fend off land grabbers and opportunists. "Water's by the well. Help yourself and be on your way." The stranger, Frank, nodded respectfully. "Much obliged." She watched him from the porch as he moved to the well, his gait betraying a slight limp. Despite her wariness, she couldn't help noticing the careful way he handled his exhausted horse, speaking soft words as he let the animal drink first. "Your horse needs more than water," she found herself saying. "Stables around back. You can bed down there for the night." Frank looked up, surprise evident in his features. "That's mighty kind, madam, miss," she corrected. "And it's not kindness. Any man who cares for his horse before himself deserves at least a roof. But you're gone at first light." The night passed uneasily for Lillian. She slept with the rifle across her lap, startling at every creak and whisper of wind. By the time Dawn's pale fingers stretched across the floorboards of her small bedroom, she had convinced herself the stranger would be gone along with whatever meager valuables she still possessed. Instead, she found him in the yard, mending a broken fence post. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, rifle still in hand though pointed at the ground. Frank straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the morning chill. "Earning my keep. Noticed this section was down. Figured I'd fix it before heading out." Lillian frowned. "I didn't ask for your help." "No, madam, miss," he corrected himself with a slight smile that did something strange to her insides. "But seems to me a woman alone on a ranch this size could use an extra pair of hands." "And what would you know about running a ranch?" she challenged. "Grew up on one in Texas. Worked cattle drives from San Antonio to Kansas City. Been riding the range since I was old enough to sit a horse." Lillian studied him, taking in the calloused hands and the sun-weathered skin that spoke of years under open skies. "I can't pay you. Wasn't asking for pay. Just a place to stay while my horse heals. After that, I'll be on my way." Against her better judgment, Lillian found herself nodding. 3 days. Then you ride on." 3 days turned into a week. Frank proved himself useful more than useful. He repaired fence lines, tended to her small herd of cattle, and even fixed the leaking roof that had plagued her since winter. He was quiet but not unfriendly, offering information about himself in small, carefully measured doses that left Lillian curious for more. She learned he'd been riding north from Colorado, that he'd fought in the war though he didn't say which side, and that he could cook a steak better than anyone she'd ever known. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the remnants of dinner before them. Frank's eyes, gray as storm clouds, seemed to darken. "Had a lot of time to practice. Man gets tired of beans and jerky after a while." "And where were you all that time?" she pressed, emboldened by the quiet intimacy of twilight. He looked away. "Places best not talked about over good food." The answer should have warned her off, but something about Frank Hawkins made Lillian want to know more. Perhaps it was the gentleness with which he treated her father's old dog, or the way he never assumed she couldn't handle something just because she was a woman. On the 10th day of his stay, riders came. Lillian spotted the dust cloud from the kitchen window where she was kneading bread dough. "Frank," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Riders coming, 5, maybe 6. He appeared in the doorway, gun belt already strapped on. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "This is my ranch," she protested. "And those might be just neighbors paying a call," he acknowledged. "But if they're not, I'd feel better knowing you were somewhere safe." The way he said it, not commanding, but concerned, made her nod despite herself. She watched from the window as he stepped out onto the porch, seemingly relaxed but with his right hand hovering near his holster. The riders slowed as they approached, and Lillian's breath caught as she recognized Jacob Turner at their head. The cattle baron had been trying to buy her out since her father died, his offers growing less generous and his methods more intimidating with each refusal. "Hawkins," Turner called out, pulling his horse to a stop. "Heard you were holed up here." Lillian frowned. "How did Turner know Frank's name?" "Turner," Frank replied evenly. "This is private property." The older man laughed, a harsh sound that scraped across Lillian's nerves. "Seems to me you're trespassing yourself, unless Miss Grant has taken to hiring drifters." "What I do on my land is my business," Lillian said, stepping onto the porch despite Frank's earlier request. She carried her father's rifle, not pointed at anyone but ready. Turner's eyes narrowed. "You might want to reconsider the company you're keeping, Miss Grant. Your friend here has quite a reputation." "State your business or move on," Frank said, his voice colder than Lillian had ever heard it. Turner leaned forward in his saddle. "Just thought the lady should know who she's harboring." The Hawkins brothers were notorious back in Texas. Rustling, robbery, worse things too. "Your brother swing for it yet, Hawkins?" Frank's hand twitched toward his gun, but he kept it at his side. "My brother's business isn't mine. Haven't seen him in 5 years." "Blood calls to blood," Turner said with mock solemnity. "Miss Grant, my offer still stands. $500 for this worthless piece of dirt before trouble finds you." "The answer is still no," Lillian said firmly. "Now get off my land." Turner tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "As you wish, madam, but remember I warned you." His gaze shifted to Frank. "Some men bring nothing but misery wherever they go." After the riders disappeared, Lillian turned to Frank, questions burning on her tongue. But the look in his eyes stopped her, cold shame and fury and something like grief, all warring beneath his careful composure. "I should go," he said quietly. "Is it true?" she asked. "What he said about your brother," Frank's jaw tightened. "Matthew made his choices, I made different ones." "But you're running from something." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "Everyone's running from something, Lillian. Some just cover more ground doing it." That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Turner's words, trying to reconcile them with the man who had spent hours teaching her how to mend harnesses, who had never once made her feel unsafe, despite being a stranger in her home. A noise from outside drew her to the window. Frank was in the barn, a lantern glowing faintly. Making ready to leave, she realized with a pang that surprised her with its intensity. Without pausing to consider her actions, Lillian pulled a shawl around her shoulders and hurried across the yard. The barn door was ajar and she slipped inside to find Frank saddling his horse. "So you're just going to disappear in the night?" she asked. He didn't turn around. "It's better this way." "Better for whom?" Now he did look at her, and the raw emotion on his face made her breath catch. "For you." "Turner's right about one thing, trouble follows my family name. Has since the war, I thought." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter what I thought. I've stayed too long already." Lillian stepped closer. "What were you running from when you came here?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, "A shooting in Colorado. Did you kill someone?" "Yes." The word hung between them, heavy as lead. "He drew first. Had been dogging my trail for months, claiming I was my brother. But a dead man is still dead, no matter who pulled the trigger first. So you're not wanted by the law." A mirthless smile touched his lips. "The law cleared me, but the man had friends, powerful ones. Sometimes the law isn't enough to keep a man safe." Lillian moved closer still, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "And sometimes a man is safer not being alone." His eyes, shadowed in the lantern light, searched her face. "Lillian, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. For 6 months, I've been fighting to keep this ranch, to prove I can make it on my own. But there's a difference between being alone because you have to be and being alone because you're choosing to run." Frank's hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. "You deserve better than a man with shadows at his back." "I deserve to make my own choices," she countered, leaning into his touch. "And I choose not to let you disappear." The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, the barest brush of his lips against hers, as though he feared she might shatter. But when her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, something broke loose in him. His hands spanned her waist, lifting her against him as the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "I should still go," he whispered, though his arms remained around her. "Then I'll go with you." He pulled back to look at her, astonishment plain on his face. "You can't leave your ranch." "This land was my father's dream, not mine," Lillian said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "I've been holding on because I thought I had to, because it was all I had left." "But it's just land, Frank. There's more land elsewhere." Frank studied her face, his expression troubled. "You'd give up everything to follow a man you barely know." "I know enough," she said simply. "I know you're honorable. I know you're kind. I know when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, determination had replaced doubt. "No, if anyone's staying, it's me. But Turner is a bully who wants your land cheap. Men like him, they push until they find resistance, then they fold." Frank's hands tightened on her waist. "We'll face him together, if you'll have me." Lillian's heart soared at the "we," at the promise of no longer facing her battles alone. "Are you proposing to stay on as my ranch hand, Mr. Hawkins?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it. "I'm proposing a great deal more than that, Miss Grant, if you're amenable." Instead of answering, she pulled him down for another kiss, this one sealing a promise neither had expected to make when the sun had set that evening. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of work and planning. Together, they began to transform the struggling ranch into something that might actually turn a profit. Frank's knowledge of cattle breeding and Lillian's head for figures made them a formidable team. Turner's men tested their boundaries twice more, but each time found Frank waiting, steady and unintimidated. After the second encounter ended with one of Turner's cowboys nursing a broken arm, the harassment stopped temporarily, at least. As spring warmed into early summer, Lillian found herself falling deeper under Frank's spell. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes, the way he always made sure she ate before he did, the gentle way he showed her how to break the new colt, the respect with which he treated her opinions on running the ranch. And at night, behind closed doors, he showed her another side of himself, passionate, uninhibited, worshipful of every inch of her body. "I never thought I'd find this," he murmured one night as they lay tangled together, moonlight spilling across the bed. Lillian traced the scar that ran across his shoulder, a relic from the war. "Find what? Home?" He kissed her forehead. Peace. Is that what we have? She asked, smiling. His expression grew serious. It's what I want us to have, what I'll fight to keep. The peace they'd found was shattered on a sweltering July afternoon. Frank was in Crimson Ridge purchasing supplies while Lillian stayed behind to balance the ledgers, a task she found surprisingly satisfying now that there were actually profits to record. The sound of hooves made her look up from the kitchen table, expecting to see Frank returning. Instead, through the window, she saw 3 unfamiliar riders approaching fast. Too fast for a social call. Heart pounding, Lillian reached for the shotgun Frank insisted she keep within reach at all times. She had just positioned herself on the porch when the riders pulled up, dust billowing around them. "Miss Grant," the lead rider called. He was younger than she'd expected, barely out of his teens with a shock of red hair beneath his hat. "Who's asking?" she replied, keeping the shotgun visible. "Name's Riley, madam. We're looking for Frank Hawkins. He's not here." The 3 men exchanged glances. "When do you expect him back?" "That depends on who's looking for him and why," Lillian said evenly. Riley straightened in his saddle. "I'm Matthew Hawkins' son, madam, Frank's nephew." Shock rendered Lillian momentarily speechless. Frank had never mentioned having a nephew, though he rarely spoke of his brother at all. "My pa's in trouble," the young man continued. "Bad trouble. They're saying he killed a man, but he didn't do it. We need Uncle Frank's help." "Your father is a wanted man," Lillian said carefully. "Frank hasn't seen him in years." "5 years, yes, madam, I know, but he'll see him now. Pa's innocent this time, and he's family." The word hung in the air between them. Family, something Frank had deliberately left behind. "Where is your father now?" Lillian asked. "Hiding in the hills about 20 miles south of here. He sent us to find Frank. Said if anyone would help him, it'd be his brother." Lillian's mind raced. If Matthew Hawkins was truly innocent, turning away his son seemed cruel. But if he wasn't, if this was some kind of trap, she could be putting Frank in danger. "Wait here," she decided. "Frank will be back soon. You can tell him yourself." The young man nodded gratefully. "Thank you, madam. We won't be any trouble." Frank returned an hour later to find 3 strangers watering their horses at his trough and Lillian waiting anxiously on the porch. "What's going on?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving to his gun as he dismounted. Before Lillian could answer, Riley stepped forward. "Uncle Frank." She watched Frank go completely still, his face draining of color as he stared at the young man. "Riley," he said finally, disbelief evident in his voice. "Last time I saw you, you were barely tall enough to reach a stirrup." "Been a while," Riley agreed. "Wish I was visiting under better circumstances." Frank's expression hardened. "Your father send you?" "Yes, sir. He needs your help." "My help," Frank repeated flatly. "After what happened in Abilene?" Riley looked down. "He says he's sorry for that. Says he was drunk and stupid and he's paid for it every day since." Frank's jaw worked. "He's paid for it. I had to leave Texas because of him. Lost everything I'd built. And now he's about to lose his life for something he didn't do." Riley's voice cracked with emotion. "They're saying he shot a man in the back. Marshall's got a posse out looking for him right now." "And why should I believe he didn't do it?" Frank demanded. "Matthew's done worse." "Because I was with him when it happened," Riley said quietly. "We were 5 miles away fishing, but nobody believes me because I'm his son." Lillian saw the conflict in Frank's face, the anger and resentment warring with something deeper, some bond that even years of separation hadn't fully severed. "Where is he?" Frank asked finally. "Holed up in an old line shack south of here. He's hurt, caught a bullet when they tried to arrest him." "That's why he couldn't come himself." Frank turned to Lillian, his expression unreadable. "I need to talk to you, alone." Inside the house, he paced the kitchen like a caged wolf. "I shouldn't go." "He's your brother," Lillian said softly. "He's a violent, selfish drunk who nearly got me killed more than once." Frank ran a hand through his hair. "Every time I've helped him in the past, I've regretted it, and if he's innocent this time, that's a mighty big if." Frank stopped pacing to look at her. "If I go, I could be riding into a trap, or I could be harboring a murderer. Either way, I'd be putting everything we've built here at risk." Lillian moved to stand before him, placing her hands on his chest. "What would you regret more, helping him and finding out he lied, or not helping him and finding out he was telling the truth?" Frank's hands covered hers. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had a good teacher in weighing difficult choices." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. "Go. Find out the truth. I'll be here when you return." Frank shook his head. "If I go, you're coming with me. I'm not leaving you alone with Turner circling like a vulture." "Frank, if your brother is hurt, then he can wait a few hours while I make arrangements here." His tone brooked no argument. "Riley and his friends can ride ahead. Tell Matthew I'm coming. But I'm not leaving you unprotected." In the end, they compromised. Frank rode with Riley after extracting a promise from their nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, to keep an eye on Lillian and the ranch. They were good people who had helped her after her father's death, and Frank trusted them as much as he trusted anyone. 3 days, he told Lillian as he prepared to leave. "If I'm not back in 3 days, sell the ranch and go east to your aunt in St. Louis." "Nothing is going to happen to you," she insisted, fighting back tears. He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you. Remember that, no matter what you might hear about me or my family." It was the first time he had said those words, and they lodged in her heart like a physical presence. "I love you too," she whispered. "Come back to me." With a last, lingering kiss, he was gone, dust rising behind him as he rode south with Riley. True to her word, Lillian kept the ranch running in Frank's absence. She checked fence lines, fed livestock, and even negotiated the sale of 3 yearling calves to a buyer passing through, getting a better price than she suspected even Frank would have managed. On the evening of the 3rd day, with still no sign of Frank, Lillian found herself on the porch, straining to see through the gathering dusk. The rational part of her knew that 3 days wasn't an exact science. A dozen things could have delayed his return without meaning disaster. But fear gnawed at her nonetheless. She was about to go inside when she spotted a lone rider approaching from the east, not the direction Frank had gone. As the figure drew closer, Lillian recognized the town marshal, Samuel Jenkins. "Evening, Miss Grant," Jenkins called as he dismounted. He was a good man, fair-minded and honest, one of the few authority figures who had treated her with respect after her father died. "Marshal," she greeted him, apprehension tightening her chest. "What brings you out this way?" Jenkins removed his hat, a gesture that sent alarm bells ringing in Lillian's head. Men removed their hats to deliver bad news. "I'm afraid I've got something difficult to tell you," he said gravely. "It's about Frank Hawkins." Lillian gripped the porch railing to steady herself. "Is he dead?" "No, madam, not as far as I know. But I've received a wire from the Colorado authorities. Seems Hawkins is wanted for murder there." Relief that Frank was alive quickly gave way to confusion. "That's not possible. Frank was cleared of any wrongdoing in Colorado. It was self-defense." Jenkins looked surprised. "You knew about the shooting." "He told me everything," Lillian said firmly. "The man drew on him first. The local law cleared him." "Well, someone's changed their story then." "The wire says he's wanted for shooting a man named Chester Blackwell in the back during a card game." Lillian shook her head vehemently. "That's not what happened. The man Blackwell had been following Frank, claiming he was his brother Matthew. He drew first in front of witnesses." "Witnesses can be bought," Jenkins said grimly. "Or intimidated. Where is Hawkins now? For a split second, Lillian considered lying, but Jenkins would find out eventually, and making him an enemy would only complicate matters. He rode south 3 days ago. His brother is in trouble, accused of a murder he claims he didn't commit. Jenkins sighed heavily. Miss Grant, I've known the Hawkins brothers by reputation for years. They're bad news, both of them. If Frank's gone to help Matthew, he's putting himself squarely on the wrong side of the law. Frank isn't like his brother, Lillian insisted. He's a good man who's been trying to outrun his family's reputation. Maybe so, Jenkins allowed. But right now, with this wire from Colorado, he's a wanted man. And if he's helping another wanted man escape justice, that makes him an accessory. What are you going to do? Lillian asked, fear making her voice sharp. Jenkins replaced his hat. My job, Miss Grant. I'm forming a posse in the morning to track them both down. I came here first as a courtesy because I respect you and your father's memory. Frank Hawkins may have charmed you, but I can't ignore a murder warrant. After the marshal left, Lillian moved through the house in a daze, her mind racing. Frank had been honest with her about his past. She believed that with every fiber of her being. Which meant someone in Colorado was lying, changing the story to make a justified shooting look like cold-blooded murder. By midnight, she had made her decision. Changing into riding clothes, she packed saddlebags with provisions, her father's rifle, and the small stash of money she kept hidden under a floorboard. If Jenkins was forming a posse in the morning, she needed to find Frank first to warn him and to stand by his side, whatever came next. The line shack Riley had described was a 2-day ride south, assuming good weather and no trouble. Lillian planned to cover as much ground as possible before dawn, then continue at a more careful pace to avoid being spotted by Jenkins or his men. As she rode away from the ranch in the moonlight, a strange calm settled over her. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, completely not following her father's dream, not bowing to society's expectations of what a woman should do. She was riding toward danger because the man she loved faced it, and that felt more right than anything she had ever done. The first day passed without incident. Lillian kept to less traveled paths, grateful for her father's insistence that she learn the territory surrounding their ranch. By nightfall, she had covered impressive ground, though her muscles protested the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. She made a cold camp in a sheltered draw, not risking a fire that might be seen from a distance. Sleep came fitfully, broken by every snapping twig and animal call. At first light, she was moving again, pushing southeast toward the rocky hills where the line shack supposedly stood. Mid-afternoon brought her first glimpse of riders, 3 men moving parallel to her route about a half-mile west. Even at that distance, she recognized Jenkins's distinctive white horse. The posse had moved faster than she'd anticipated. Lillian urged her mount into a copse of trees, watching anxiously as the riders continued south. They hadn't seen her, but their presence meant she needed to be even more cautious. Once they were out of sight, she altered her course slightly, taking a rougher but less exposed path through the hills. As dusk approached, fatigue and worry made her careless. Rounding a bend in a narrow ravine, she nearly rode straight into 2 men on horseback. Pulling up sharply, Lillian reached for her rifle but froze when she recognized one of the riders. Frank? His name burst from her lips in a relieved sob. Frank stared at her in shocked disbelief. Lillian. What in God's name are you doing out here? The second rider, older, with the same storm-gray eyes as Frank but a harder face marked by dissipation, and hard living, looked between them with narrowed eyes. This your woman, little brother. She shouldn't be here. Frank ignored him, dismounting quickly to stride toward Lillian. His hands gripped her waist, lifting her from the saddle. Instead of embracing her as she expected, he held her at arm's length, his expression thunderous. "You could have been killed riding alone out here. What were you thinking?" "Jenkins came to the ranch," she said breathlessly. "There's a warrant for your arrest from Colorado. They're saying you shot that man in the back." Frank's face darkened further. "Blackwell's friends, I knew they wouldn't let it rest. The marshals formed a posse. I saw them a few hours ago heading this way." She clutched at his shirt. "We need to go now." "We?" The older man, Matthew, she presumed, gave a harsh laugh. "Brother, you've really stepped in it this time. A warrant and a woman. Didn't I teach you better?" Frank rounded on him. "You taught me nothing worth knowing, Matt, and you can keep your opinions about Lillian to yourself." Matthew raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just saying, she complicates things. We need to be riding for the border, not figuring out how to protect a lady." "I don't need protection," Lillian said sharply. "I can ride as well as either of you." Matthew looked her over appraisingly. "Spirited. I can see why you like her, Frank, but she still doesn't belong in this mess." "The mess you created," Frank pointed out coldly. "The mess I'm helping you out of again, despite my better judgment." "Uncle Frank," Riley's voice came from up the ravine. "Riders coming, at least 5 of them." Frank muttered a curse. "Jenkins must have picked up our trail." He turned to Lillian, his expression softening slightly. "We need to move. Can you keep up?" "Try to leave me behind and find out," she replied, lifting her chin. A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "That's my girl." He helped her back onto her horse. "Stay close. We're heading for the line shack. It's defensible, and there's only one approach." The next hour was a blur of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. Lillian's muscles screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace, determined not to be the weak link. As darkness fell, they reached a small clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood against a rocky hillside. "Riley, keep watch," Frank ordered as they dismounted. "Matt, get inside and stay there. Your leg won't hold up to another chase." For once, Matthew didn't argue, limping into the cabin with a pained grimace. The wound Riley had mentioned was clearly taking its toll. Frank led Lillian to a small stream that ran behind the shack, both of them kneeling to drink the cold, clear water. "I'm sorry," he said finally, watching her splash water on her dust-streaked face. "This isn't what I wanted for you." "What did you want?" she asked, genuinely curious. His gaze turned distant. "A life. A real one with a home and children and mornings where the biggest worry was whether it might rain." He looked back at her, his eyes haunted. "I thought maybe with you I could have that." "You still can," Lillian insisted. "We just need to clear your name." Frank shook his head. "It's not that simple. Even if we prove the Colorado charges are false, I'm helping a wanted man escape. Matt really is innocent this time. I've confirmed the alibi with people I trust. But the law doesn't care. They've been looking for a reason to hang him for years." "So what's the plan?" "Get Matt across the border into New Mexico territory. I know people there who can help him disappear. Then—" He hesitated. "Then what?" Lillian pressed. "Then I was going to come back for you," he admitted. "Ask you to leave everything behind and start fresh somewhere new. Somewhere my name isn't known." The enormity of what he was suggesting hit Lillian like a physical blow. Leave her ranch, her home, everything she'd fought to preserve since her father's death. For love. "I would have said yes," she whispered. Frank's eyes widened slightly. "You would leave it all?" "For me, I already did," she pointed out with a small smile. "I'm here, aren't I?" He reached out, his fingers tracing her cheek with wonder. "Lillian Grant, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known." A shout from Riley shattered the moment. "Riders coming up the trail." Frank was on his feet instantly. "Get inside," he told Lillian, pulling his gun. "Now." Inside the cabin, Matthew was checking his own weapon, his face grim in the lamplight. "How many?" Riley counted 4, Frank replied, positioning himself at a window. "Could be Jenkins and his posse, or it could be bounty hunters. Either way, they've got us pinned." "We could make a stand," Matthew suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Frank shook his head. "4 guns against how many, and with your leg the way it is? No, we need to talk." "Talk?" Matthew laughed bitterly. "Since when has talking to lawmen ever worked out for us?" "Since it's Jenkins out there," Frank said firmly. "He's a fair man, and we have something he doesn't know we have." "What's that?" Lillian asked. Frank turned to her, determination written across his features. "The truth, and you to help tell it." As dusk deepened into night, Jenkins and his men established positions surrounding the cabin. Frank had Riley signal with a lantern that they wanted to parley, and after some hesitation, Jenkins agreed to approach alone. "You're in a bad spot, Hawkins," the marshal called from the edge of the clearing. "Got a cabin full of wanted men and an innocent woman. Be smart and come out peacefully." Frank stepped onto the porch, hands carefully away from his weapons. "I want your word that Miss Grant won't be harmed, no matter what happens." "She's not who I'm after," Jenkins replied. "Send her out and we can talk terms." "I'm staying right here," Lillian called, moving to stand beside Frank despite his attempt to keep her inside. "Marshal Jenkins, there's more to this than you know." Jenkins sighed audibly. "Miss Grant, I understand you've developed feelings for this man, but nothing," she interrupted. "Frank didn't murder anyone in Colorado. He acted in self-defense, and I can prove it." This caught Jenkins's attention. "Prove it how?" "I have letters," Lillian said, praying her gamble would work. "From the witnesses in Colorado. I contacted them after Frank told me what happened, wanted to understand what he'd been through. Their accounts match his exactly. Blackwell drew first, in front of a saloon full of people." It was a lie she had no such letters. But she needed time, needed Jenkins to start doubting the warrant's legitimacy. Jenkins was silent for a long moment. "And what about Matthew?" "He shot a man in cold blood just last month." "No, sir, he didn't," Riley said, joining them on the porch. "I was with him the whole day. We were fishing 5 miles from where that shooting happened." "The word of a son doesn't count for much," Jenkins pointed out. "What about the word of Reverend Thomas from the Methodist Church in Cedar Ridge?" Frank asked. "He saw them at the fishing hole that day, stopped to talk about the Sunday service." This was no lie. Riley had confirmed the encounter when Frank questioned him earlier. Jenkins shifted his weight, uncertainty creeping into his stance. "Even if that's true, I've still got a valid warrant for Frank from Colorado." "Wire the sheriff in Silverton," Frank suggested. "Ask him to re-interview the witnesses. I'm betting they'll tell a different story than what's in that warrant. And while I'm sending wires and waiting for replies, what are you planning to do? Sit tight in that cabin." Frank glanced at Lillian, then back to Jenkins. "No, I'm surrendering myself to your custody. Take me back to Crimson Ridge, hold me until you get confirmation about the Colorado charges. But let Matthew go. He's hurt, he's no threat to anyone, and he's innocent of the murder he's accused of." "Frank, no," Lillian gasped, grabbing his arm. He covered her hand with his. "It's the only way. If I run, I'll be running forever. This ends now, one way or another." Matthew appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. "Little brother, you always were too honorable for your own good." He looked at Jenkins. "Marshal, if Frank's turning himself in, I'm coming too. I'm tired of running. If you've got the stomach to hear the truth about what really happened last month, I'm ready to tell it." Jenkins studied the group before him, Frank standing tall and resolute, Lillian clinging to his arm with fierce protectiveness, Matthew pale but determined, and young Riley looking simultaneously terrified and proud. "I've been a lawman for 20 years," Jenkins said finally. "Seen all manner of men try to talk their way out of trouble, but I've also seen innocent men hang because nobody took the time to listen." He holstered his gun. "All right, Hawkins. Both of you come back to town with me. We'll sort this out properly." "Miss Grant, you're welcome to ride along, though I suspect wild horses couldn't drag you away at this point." The ride back to Crimson Ridge was tense but uneventful. Jenkins kept Frank and Matthew separated from each other and under close guard, but he treated them fairly, even ensuring that Matthew's wound was properly tended when they stopped for the night. Lillian rode alongside the wagon carrying Matthew, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. The lie about the letters from Colorado witnesses would be discovered as soon as Jenkins sent his wire. She needed to act quickly. When they reached town the following afternoon, a small crowd gathered to watch as the infamous Hawkins brothers were led to the jail. Lillian ignored the stares and whispers, marching determinedly into the telegraph office as soon as Frank and Matthew were secured. She spent nearly all her remaining money sending wires to Silverton, Colorado, one to the sheriff demanding clarification about the witnesses to Blackwell's shooting, another to the saloon owner where it had happened, and a third to the editor of the local newspaper, requesting any information about Blackwell's associates. For the next 3 days, Lillian divided her time between the ranch and town, checking for replies to her telegrams and visiting Frank in his cell. Matthew's condition worsened, the wound in his leg showing signs of infection despite the town doctor's attention. "He needs better care than I can provide here," Dr. Wilson told Jenkins on the 4th day. "If you want him alive for trial, he should be in a proper hospital." Jenkins shook his head. "Nearest hospital's in Cheyenne. No way to transport him that far in his condition." "Then he'll likely die," the doctor said bluntly. Frank, overhearing from his cell, gripped the bars. "He's innocent, Jenkins. Are you going to let an innocent man die in your jail?" Before the marshal could answer, the telegraph operator burst in, waving a yellow slip. "Wire for you, Marshal." "From Colorado." Jenkins read the message quickly, his eyebrows rising steadily. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, then looked up at Frank. "Sheriff in Silverton says the witnesses have recanted. Admit they were pressured to change their stories by Blackwell's brother-in-law, some mining magnate with political aspirations who didn't want his family name connected to a fair shooting." Relief crashed through Lillian like a wave. "So the charges against Frank are dropped?" "Appears so." Jenkins unlocked Frank's cell. "You're a free man, Hawkins, at least as far as Colorado is concerned." Frank didn't move. "And Matthew?" Jenkins sighed. "That's more complicated. I've sent inquiries about the Reverend's testimony but haven't heard back yet." "He'll die before you get an answer," Frank said quietly. "You know that." The marshal studied him for a long moment. "What would you suggest?" "Let me take him to my ranch. It's isolated, easy to guard. Lillian and I will take full responsibility for him. If he tries to run, which he won't, in his condition I'll bring him back myself." Jenkins rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "It's irregular." "It's humane," Lillian interjected, "and practical. You can't spare men to guard a dying prisoner, and the town won't thank you for the expense of burying him when he succumbs in that cell." "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Grant," Jenkins said with a slight smile. "All right, but I'll be checking in regularly, and if he recovers enough to run." "He won't," Frank promised. That evening they transported Matthew to the ranch in Jenkins's wagon, the journey clearly agonizing for the injured man. Riley rode alongside, his young face tight with worry for his father, Dr. Wilson accompanied them, bringing medicines and instructions for Matthew's care. "Clean the wound 3 times daily," he told Lillian. Keep him cool if fever rises and make sure he drinks as much water as he can keep down. Beyond that, it's in God's hands. For the next 2 weeks, life on the ranch revolved around Matthew's sick. Frank and Lillian took turns nursing him, changing bandages, spooning broth into his mouth when he was lucid enough to swallow. Riley proved surprisingly adept at helping, his clumsy teenage hands becoming gentle when tending to his father. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Matthew began to improve. The angry red streaks retreating from his wound, his periods of lucidity lengthening, his appetite returning. During one of his better moments, he caught Frank's wrist as his brother changed his bandage. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice weak but clear. "After everything I've done to you," Frank didn't look up from his task. "Because you're my brother. That didn't matter to you 5 years ago." Now Frank did meet his gaze. "It always mattered. That's why I left, because I couldn't watch you destroy yourself anymore." Matthew released his wrist, staring up at the ceiling. "I was drunk most of those 5 years, angry, blaming everyone but myself." His eyes shifted to Lillian, who was arranging fresh bedding nearby. "Then Riley started growing up, looking at me the way I used to look at our father, like I was something to be feared instead of respected. Children have a way of showing us our truest selves," Lillian observed quietly. Matthew nodded weakly. "Been trying to change, not very successfully, as you can see." He attempted a smile that turned into a grimace of pain. "But I didn't kill that man they are accusing me of. That's the God's honest truth, Frank." "I believe you," Frank said simply. On the 17th day of Matthew's convalescence, Jenkins rode out to the ranch with news. "Reverend Thomas confirmed the alibi," he announced without preamble. "Says he spoke with Matthew and the boy for nearly an hour that day, miles from where the shooting happened. Between that and some new evidence that's surfaced pointing to another suspect, the charges are being dropped." Frank closed his eyes briefly in relief. "Thank you, Marshal." Jenkins shrugged uncomfortably. "Don't thank me. I'm just doing my job, all parts of it, including making sure innocent men don't hang." He glanced toward the house. "How's he doing?" "Better," Lillian replied. "Dr. Wilson thinks he'll recover fully, given time and proper care." "Good." Jenkins hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, Hawkins, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Sometimes the law moves too quickly, especially when a man has a reputation." Frank nodded acknowledgement. "I understand. You were doing your duty." After Jenkins left, Frank found Lillian in the kitchen preparing a tray for Matthew's dinner. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, burying his face in her hair. "I never properly thanked you," he murmured. She leaned back into his embrace. "For what?" "For believing in me. For fighting for me when anyone else would have run the other direction." His arms tightened. "For loving me enough to risk everything." Lillian turned in his arms to face him. "I didn't risk everything. I found everything." His kiss was tender, reverent, full of promise. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Marry me. Not someday, not when things settle down. Now, as soon as possible." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Though you should know I'm a package deal now, includes one recovering outlaw and a teenage nephew." Frank laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever heard from him. "I think we can manage. This ranch has always needed more family than just us." 3 weeks later, they were married in the small church in Crimson Ridge, Reverend Peterson officiating. Jenkins served as Frank's best man, a development that raised eyebrows but seemed entirely fitting to those who understood the respect that had grown between the two men. Matthew, still weak but determined to stand for his brother, gave Lillian away in place of her deceased father. Riley, scrubbed clean and uncomfortably formal in borrowed clothes, beamed from the front pew. "Never thought I'd see the day." Matthew whispered to Lillian as he escorted her down the aisle. "Frank settling down, me playing the respectable relative. Our father would have dropped dead from the shock." Lillian squeezed his arm. "People change when they're given reason to." "You gave him that reason," Matthew said seriously. "Thank you for that. My brother deserves some happiness after all the trouble I've brought him." At the altar, Frank watched her approach with an expression of such naked adoration that Lillian felt her heart might burst. This complicated, honorable, fierce man was hers, and she was his for all the days to come. The reception was held at the Henderson farm, neighbors and townspeople gathering to celebrate despite the lingering whispers about the Hawkins name. Lillian found she didn't care about the gossip. The people who mattered were there, supporting them. As evening fell, Frank led her away from the festivities to a quiet corner of the Hendersons' garden. "Happy?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Completely," she assured him, "though I'm ready to go home whenever you are." His smile turned heated. "I've been ready since you said I do." Later that night, in the privacy of their bedroom truly theirs now, with a gold band on Frank's finger to match hers, Lillian watched her husband undress with appreciative eyes. He still moved with that unconscious grace that had first caught her attention, but now there was an ease to him that hadn't been there before, as though some great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He caught her staring and paused, suddenly self-conscious in a way that seemed at odds with his usual confidence. "What is it?" "Just admiring the view," she teased, propping herself up on the pillows. A flush crept up his neck and he turned away slightly. "You shouldn't see me like this," he muttered. Lillian sat up straighter, struck by the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. "Like what?" He gestured vaguely at his scarred torso, at the lean hardness of a body shaped by hardship and survival. "Marked, damaged. Not what a woman dreams of on her wedding night." Understanding dawned. For all his outward strength, part of Frank still believed he was unworthy, tainted by his family name, by the violence of his past, by the years spent running. In that moment, Lillian loved him so fiercely it was almost painful. "Then stop pretending I don't," she said softly. He turned back to her, confusion evident in his expression. "Stop pretending I don't see you," she clarified, holding out her hand to him. "All of you. The scars, the rough edges, the nightmares that still wake you sometimes. I see them, Frank. I choose them, because they're part of the man I love." Something broke open in his face, a last barrier falling away. He moved to the bed, taking her outstretched hand and pressing it to his heart. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered. Lillian drew him down beside her. "You didn't have to do anything. Love isn't earned, Frank. It's given, freely, completely." Her fingers traced the scar that ran across his shoulder. "I love your strength and your gentleness, your honor and your fierce protectiveness. Every mark on your body tells the story of the man you've become, and I love that man with everything I am." Frank's eyes, storm gray and intense, searched hers for a long moment. Then he lowered his mouth to hers, pouring everything he couldn't say into the kiss: his gratitude, his wonder, his absolute devotion. That night, they came together not as two people seeking comfort or pleasure, but as partners binding their lives irrevocably to one another, healing each other's wounds, accepting each other's flaws, promising with every touch and whisper to face whatever came next, side by side. Autumn turned to winter, bringing heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Matthew regained his strength slowly but steadily, proving surprisingly useful around the ranch once he could walk without pain. He had a craftsman's touch with wood, repairing furniture and crafting new pieces that transformed the sparse house into a true home. Riley thrived under Frank's guidance, soaking up knowledge about ranching like parched earth absorbs rain. The boy, who had arrived desperate and afraid, grew into a confident young man, his admiration for his uncle evident in the way he mimicked Frank's stance, his speech patterns, even his careful approach to problems. As Christmas approached, Lillian found herself facing a new challenge: how to create holiday traditions for their unconventional family. Her own childhood Christmases had been modest but warm, her mother filling their home with evergreen boughs and homemade treats before her death when Lillian was 16. "We never really celebrated Christmas," Frank admitted when she raised the subject. "Our father wasn't much for holidays." "Then we'll start our own traditions," Lillian decided, undeterred. Riley should have proper Christmas memories. They cut a small pine from their own land, setting it up in the corner of the sitting room. Matthew carved simple ornaments, stars and angels and tiny horses, while Lillian strung popcorn and dried berries. Riley, initially dismissive of such childish activities, soon became the most enthusiastic participant, spending hours arranging and rearranging the decorations. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, they gathered around the fireplace. Frank produced a bottle of fine whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, pouring small glasses for the adults and a thimbleful for Riley. "Just this once, and don't tell the Reverend," he cautioned with a wink. "To family," Frank said, raising his glass. "The one we've made, not the one we were born to." "To family," they echoed, the word holding new meaning for each of them. Later, after Matthew and Riley had retired to their rooms in the converted bunkhouse, Frank presented Lillian with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It isn't much," he said apologetically. "Ordering anything special from the catalog would have given away the surprise." Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a tiny horseshoe encircling a heart, suspended on a slender chain. "Frank, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it to catch the firelight. "Had the blacksmith make it," he explained, taking it from her hands to fasten it around her neck. "Wanted you to have something that represented us luck and love together." Lillian touched the pendant where it rested against her skin. "I have something for you too," she said, suddenly shy. "Though it's not something I could wrap." Frank raised an eyebrow questioningly. Taking a deep breath, Lillian took his hand and placed it gently against her stomach. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it last week. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Frank went utterly still, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "A baby," he whispered. Lillian nodded, tears of happiness pricking her eyes. "Due in early summer." For a moment, Frank seemed incapable of speech, his hand trembling slightly against her still flat abdomen. Then he gathered her into his arms with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "A child," he murmured into her hair. "Our child. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction left little doubt. He drew back to look at her, his face transformed by a joy so profound it seemed to illuminate him from within. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. Lillian, you've given me everything I never dared hope for: a home, a family, a future worth fighting for." As spring softened the land, bringing new growth to fields left dormant by winter, Lillian blossomed with her pregnancy. Frank became fiercely protective, limiting her chores despite her protests that she wasn't made of porcelain. "Let the man fuss," Matthew advised her with amusement. "Never seen Frank scared of anything until now. The thought of something happening to you or that baby has him terrified." It was true. For all his outward calm, Frank hovered anxiously, insisting on accompanying her even on short walks around the property. His protectiveness might have chafed if it hadn't been so clearly born of love rather than distrust in her capabilities. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Frank's knowledge of cattle breeding and Matthew's unexpected head for figures helped them expand their herd significantly. By late spring, they had hired 2 additional hands to help with the increased workload, carefully vetted men who knew nothing of the Hawkins brothers' past. One warm evening in May, as Lillian sat on the porch watching the sunset, her hands resting on her rounded belly, Jacob Turner rode up unexpectedly. Frank had gone to town for supplies, leaving Matthew and Riley working in the north pasture. Lillian felt a flicker of apprehension as the cattle baron dismounted. She hadn't seen him since before Frank's arrest, though she'd heard he'd been unusually quiet in recent months, focusing on his own vast holdings rather than trying to expand them further. Miss Grant or Mrs. Hawkins now, I should say, Turner greeted her, removing his hat. Hope I'm not intruding. What can I do for you, Mr. Turner? Lillian asked, remaining seated. Her pregnancy made rising awkward, and she saw no reason to struggle to her feet for a man who had once threatened her livelihood. Turner looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Actually, I came to apologize. Of all the things Lillian had expected him to say, an apology was the last. Apologize? For what, specifically? There's quite a list to choose from. A reluctant smile tugged at Turner's mouth. I suppose I deserve that. For all of it, then. The pressure to sell, the threats, spreading rumors about your husband. What's brought on this sudden change of heart? Lillian asked skeptically. Turner sighed heavily. Heart trouble, the literal kind. Doctor says I need to put my affairs in order, make peace where I can. He glanced around the ranch. You've done well here, better than I expected. Your father would be proud. The mention of her father softened Lillian slightly. Thank you for saying that. I knew him, you know. Before you were born. We were friends once before a woman came between us. Turner's expression turned wistful. Your mother. We both courted her, but she chose him. I never quite forgave him for that. So your harassment of this ranch was personal, Lillian realized, not business at all. Turner had the grace to look ashamed. Started that way, then became habit, I suppose. Old grudges die hard. He replaced his hat. Anyway, I wanted you to know I'll be leaving you in peace from now on. And if you ever need anything, assistance with water rights, protection from rustlers, anything at all, you need only ask. Consider it my attempt to make amends. Before Lillian could respond, hoofbeats announced Frank's return. His posture tensed visibly when he spotted Turner, and he dismounted quickly, striding toward them with barely concealed hostility. Turner, he said coldly, what brings you here? Lillian held up a hand to forestall confrontation. Mr. Turner was just leaving, after extending an olive branch. Frank looked between them in disbelief. An olive branch. Believe it or not, Hawkins, even old dogs can learn new tricks, Turner said dryly. Take care of her. She deserves the best. With a nod to them both, he mounted his horse and rode away. What was that about? Frank asked, sitting beside Lillian and placing a protective hand on her belly. She leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. The closing of an old chapter, I think, and maybe the start of a more peaceful new one. On a sweltering July afternoon, Lillian gave birth to a son, Frederick Matthew Hawkins, named for his father and uncle. The labor was long and difficult, leaving Lillian exhausted but triumphant as she cradled the tiny red-faced infant in her arms. Frank sat beside them on the bed, his expression a mixture of awe, terror, and overwhelming love as he touched his son's miniature fingers with trembling hands. He's perfect, he whispered. Perfect like his mother. Matthew and Riley hovered awkwardly in the doorway, uncertain of their welcome in this intimate family moment until Lillian beckoned them closer. Come meet your nephew, she invited Matthew. And your cousin, she added to Riley. As Matthew held the baby with surprising gentleness, tears glistening in eyes so like Frank's, Lillian realized how completely her life had transformed in just over a year. From a lonely woman struggling to maintain her father's legacy to the heart of a family that had formed itself against all odds, bound not just by blood, but by choice and love and second chances. Frank seemed to read her thoughts, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "Thank you," he murmured for her ears alone. "For what?" she asked, though she knew. "For seeing me," he said simply. "All of me. For making me stop pretending you didn't." Lillian smiled, remembering that moment of vulnerability on their wedding night that had crystallized something fundamental between them, the understanding that true love sees clearly and loves anyway, embraces flaws rather than ignoring them, accepts the whole person rather than an idealized version. "Always," she promised, and in that word was a future years of working side by side, raising their son and perhaps other children, building something lasting and meaningful from the wild, rocky soil of their shared lives. Outside, the Wyoming sun gilded the land they had fought for, the home they had created together. Inside, in the quiet of their bedroom with family gathered close, Frank and Lillian held each other's gaze and saw clearly what they had become. Not a cowboy and a rancher's daughter, not a man running from his past, and a woman clinging to her father's dream, but partners in the truest sense, bound by love, strengthened by trials and facing the future unafraid, because they faced it together.